New Dr. Phil. Alex Murdaugh, guilty.
He paved his own road to the penitentiary.
The body language that gave him away.
Mouth grooming, rocks back and forth. There were so many red flags in the vehicle.
But we don't see any tears.
Did you notice him getting smaller? He's turning into a smaller target.
And this is an unconscious thing when people are under attack.
He exposes the top of his head. That's submission all day, every day.
Let's do it.
Have a good show, everybody. Here we go.
This is a safe place to talk about hard things.
Stand by. We'll count you down.
Today is going to be a changing day in your life.
5, 4.
Get ready to take care of you. Well, it's day 2 of our dissection and breakdown of the Alex Murdaugh trial that ended in a guilty verdict. And it came back quick. I'm back with juror Craig Moyer, former prosecutor Lonnie Coombs, court TV reporter Vinnie Politan, who's joining us virtually from Atlanta. Now today, I invited 2 very close friends of mine, body language experts Scott Rouse and Greg Hartley. Now there's just nobody better to get to the truth than these 2. They are interrogators who have worked with the FBI, law enforcement, and the military. Now, Scott says his approach is biological, and Greg looks for motivation. Now, together, they have been called a human lie detector. It's kind of scary to be around them, actually. On their YouTube channel, The Behavior Panel, they analyzed Alex's behavior on the stand and his first recorded interview in the police car the night of the murders. Welcome, guys. Thanks for coming and talking about this.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
Now, we've talked about this some, and, you know, I want everybody to just stop and think for a second, particularly if you're a parent. Think just how demented you have to be to take guns down and shoot your spouse and your child in the chest and head with a shotgun, and their brains are laying out on the ground there. I mean, think about your own child for a minute and think about how far off you got to be to do something like that. Okay, now you're in a car and you're talking about it, and you're already generating lies and alibis and working stuff out. You don't have any grief. You're not, that's not happening, right?
No, Doc, I'm a combat veteran. And when you happen upon somebody who's injured, never mind your family, you happen upon somebody who's injured in that way, it's horrific. And you have emotion, and all those emotions boil up. We don't see that. We don't see that. We see no grief muscle. We see no, his body language doesn't show it. He does the wail, and then his breathing comes back to normal. There's something wrong here. Right off, we saw it.
Yeah, and that happens immediately. And talk about this grief muscle, the inverted. Talk about that.
Yeah, so Scott will always say I'm the guy to do it because I can do it on demand. If you can see it on the camera, it's this little arch of muscles at the top of these concern muscles in your head. It's actually 5 muscles that come together. That term was coined by Darwin, oddly enough. But when we're showing pain, remorse, feelings of grief, that muscle hops out. All of you have seen it. If you think about people you see who are suffering, losing a loved one, you'll see that arch. It's up here like an upside-down horseshoe. There.
What behavior should we look for in this video we're getting ready to see?
First thing we look for are tears. This is supposed to be real emotion and real crying, but we don't see any tears. Let's pay attention to his blink rate, see what happens with that, and the way he breathes and his movements. The more fluid he would be, the more honest we would be under the impression he is. But the less he moves, the tighter he keeps his arms to his body and closer to himself, that's when we start going, something's not right here.
All right, let's take a look.
Start at the top, take your time.
I pulled up and I could see him, and, you know, I knew something was bad. I ran out. I knew it was really bad. My boy over there, I could see it was...
Sorry.
And I could see his brain on his... Maggie, and his cell phone popped out of his pocket. I started to try to do something with it, thinking maybe, but then I put it back down really quickly. Then I went to my wife, and I mean, I could see.
Did you touch Maggie at all?
I did. I touched them both.
That transition from emotional to, I touched them both. Your kid is better than that.
Yeah, and this you commented on this, just no tears.
There's none.
And it's interesting. Can we have this back up? There's a point here where he goes to, right here, he goes to his eyes, and then he's checking for tears. I think he's trying to see if he's actually selling this or not.
You don't see him use the Kleenex. He's got it and he messes around with it and pulls it apart and puts it, but he doesn't put it up to his eyes.
On the stand, he kept touching his nose before all the waterworks started and no tears. So there's something up here.
When he's crying, it seems like he's laughing almost. If you might see this from a distance or not be aware of what's happening, the expression he's making is a combination of things. It's more, he's trying to look sad, but he's trying to look like he's crying. And when you do that, when you and I do it, we could do this, but we do that, just all you have to do is bring these parts of our mouth up and we look like we're smiling. When you don't really experience that emotion, it could look like you're laughing.
Yeah, and that transition from, I went over and checked her. Did you touch her? I did.
Yeah, I love that transition.
Yeah.
Your kid, you would pull your kid on the carpet over a transition like that about a lie. We all know that is not real.
Yeah, all right. Coming up, a video where Scott and Greg say Alex tried to look like he was telling the truth, but it wasn't working at all. We'll show you what they're talking about next. At the time, you weren't buying it.
No, it's just not true.
This is a great example of why body language matters. The same words don't mean the same thing.
And later,
I thought this is very powerful testimony. When Alex took the stand, he essentially called them both liars. Who do you want to believe? The two women who have nothing to gain by telling the truth here, or Alex, who is the master liar?
today we're analyzing Alex Murdaugh's behavior during his double murder trial with body language experts Scott Rouse and Greg Hartley. Now, Scott and Greg say there are several indicators to tell Alex was lying when he took the stand, which is exactly what juror Craig Moyer perceived from the jury box and was observed in the jury room. Take a look.
At some point during this interview, when you were able to plan your lie about this event, and you made that decision. But it wasn't what we just played. It wasn't yet. It was some point after that.
I don't think that's a lie right there. Is the reason why I don't think that it's occurred before this, because what I'm saying there, I believe to be truthful. And I know this. I know for a fact that when David Owens asked me about my relationship with my wife and my child, I know that that played a role in that. And I believe that, and I may be wrong, but I believe that this was before that.
You ever heard the expression, not telling the whole truth is the same as telling the lie?
Sure I have.
That's something you understood as a lawyer and a prosecutor?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when all that's going on, at the time, you weren't buying it.
No, it wasn't.
Did it just, what about it didn't ring true with you?
He just didn't come off true. I mean, when you look at him in his face and he doesn't cry, you know, I mean, it's just not true.
Vinny, you're watching this live at the time, right?
Absolutely.
What about it jumped out at you?
You know what I didn't understand? You know, he chose to have the trial where it was. Most high-profile cases we cover at Court TV, the defendants don't want to be anywhere near the scene of the murder. He wanted to be there. So as I watched him, I was wondering, does he think that he can convince these folks because maybe he's been doing it for years? You know, in terms of the clients that he's been cheating for years, his law partners, everyone's from down there. And he's been basically lying and cheating and committing fraud with a smile on his face.
You know, he sees it intuitively, and you guys saw a list of behaviors that from an expert standpoint jumped out. Give us a few of the big ones.
Well, one of the big ones is fading facts. When he starts hitting them on the details of that, as he speaks, he gets quieter and quieter as it goes along. The more uncomfortable you are with the answer, the less you want to go, it's this. You want to go, it's this. So you're more apt to start getting quieter. And he leans back just a touch if we'll look at that closely.
Okay. And what about him keep grabbing this mic and adjusting it?
Well,
neither of them were moving.
Right.
So
that's more of an adapter. He's trying to get rid of that built-up stress or tension, something to hang on to, something to grab onto to make him, to settle him down a little bit. If you'll notice, Craig, his hand's been doing this pretty much the whole time he's been here, but that we've been sitting up here because it's a big deal for him. But he's trying to get rid of some of that stress by rubbing on his hand a little bit like that. So Murdaugh is using that microphone, just something to do, anything to get rid of some of that energy that's building up, that stress, so it doesn't show when he's giving his answer.
But a great indicator to me that he's lying in places here is he lilts along and tells his story when it's prepared with a downward intonation. And then when he gets in a bind, his story starts to go, he starts to hesitate. And I'm sure you could feel it. You could tell when he's lying. This one, the reason we think it's the most powerful is we called out, long before he was on the stand, we called out the lie in the video when he decided to lie. There were so many red flags in the vehicle that we said, something has happened right here. And it was around whether he was there or not.
And what jumped out about?
Well, there's a place where they ask him, what was your relationship with Paul? And he goes, wonderful. And they said, what was your relationship with Maggie? And he goes, wonderful, and changes directions, tone, and blink rate. And so there we knew this is a great example of why body language matters. The same words don't mean the same thing. Something is wrong between those two relationships. We don't know which, why. We just know there's a red flag.
And those are just red flags that give us a heads up to start asking questions more around what's happening with that.
Yeah, and there are like a couple of hundred indicators, and it's like whack-a-mole. You can't control them all, even if you know what they are.
That's right.
Exactly.
Well, it's worse, honestly, for us if we were trying to hide something. It is for you if you don't know, because you'll have a couple you think you're supposed to hide, and you'll get, there's one up there, you'll get overly polite. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. No, yes. You start getting too friendly. We go, hold on. Something's up.
Yeah, because you're solicitous. You're trying to endear yourself to the person. If he hadn't taken the stand, Lonnie, would you have put him on?
No, not knowing the way he ended up being. Now, we talked about this before he took the stand, Dr. Phil, and I thought if he's just going to get up and say, hey, I'm so sorry for the financial crimes, you know, this partial mea culpa, but I didn't do the murders, and draw that line, I thought that might sell to some people. But once he decided to take the kennel video lie head on and say to everybody, yeah, I lied about the most important thing in this murder case, and that is where I was, knowing how crucial that was, knowing that anyone who wanted to find the actual killer would be telling law enforcement that, and I hid that for years. And he gets up there and just says, oh, yeah, I lied about that. And then he starts talking about his addiction. He talks about how he doesn't trust SLED, and how, you know, all of these things that he was nervous that night, and yet he told it for 2 years. That just did not ring true. And I think for the jurors, and Craig has said this, that went right to the heart of the murder cases. Here's another thing I think, Dr. Phil, it's important. You know, he said he is this wonderful father, and everybody says, how could a father, you know, kill his own son? Let me tell you what kind of father he was. He comes across his son brutally, violently murdered, and his wife. Oh my goodness, there is a killer out targeting my family. And I think that's because of these threats to my family. What does he do first? Does he call his only remaining son Buster? No, he does not. He does not call him for 40 minutes. He calls and texts 13 other times before he finally calls his son.
Well, he actually called some other family members to come over.
Yes.
So
and
there's an
too.
active shooter in the woods. Y'all come over.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
right.
We need some more targets. Coming up, what Scott and Greg say was a dead giveaway. Alex was lying when questioned about calls to his wife, Maggie. We'll talk about that next.
He's cognizant enough to keep his body turned toward the jury, and then he sort of tracks the other attorney with his eyes going to the other side.
We've been analyzing the testimony of Alex Murdaugh during his double murder trial. Now, he was just found guilty of the murders of his wife and youngest son and sentenced to 2 life terms. Now, body language experts Scott Rouse and Greg Hartley of the behavior panel say Alex's behavior was a dead giveaway that he was lying, not a close call. Here's what happened on the stand when he was questioned about calls to his wife Maggie the night of the murders.
Why didn't you go down to the kennels that were so close by?
There was no reason to. I mean,
Making multiple missed calls to Maggie, and she's so close. And there's a driveway right there. Why do you not just go down there and say, hey guys, I'm heading over there?
It wasn't important to do that. Me making those phone calls is simply me letting, I believe I called Maggie and I called Paul, but that's simply me just letting them know that I'm leaving for a minute, I'll be back. The fact that they don't answer is not unusual at all. Now, it is odd, it is unusual that they never call me back. But at that moment, the fact that there's a missed call, when I know they're on the property, I mean, that doesn't even register at all. That's perfectly normal to try to call somebody who's on the property and not be able to get them. And as far as not going down there, there was no sense of urgency. Maggie was with Paul. You know, she should be as safe as she could be.
What bothers you about this?
2 really big red flags for me. Now, you know, we talk about body language as baseline. What's normal for you is normal for you. What's normal for me is normal for me. There's a spot where he says it was not abnormal for them to not answer. It was abnormal for them not to call. And there's a quick fluctuation right through his brow. Do we know what it means? No, but that's the business we're in, is we're measuring why not this. And the other one is when he is talking about them being missing and the grief, and he's crying. There's still no grief muscle in this guy's forehead. He's talking about his kid being missing. When you push on him, when he pushes on him, you see the grief muscle. When he goes back to talking about the child or about them being injured, gone. Should have been as safe as possible. You would think his forehead would not uncurl, but it doesn't.
Right. Also, we're seeing a great combination of someone trying to stay calm, because the attorney is poking at him, trying to make him angry, which is working, but at the same time, he's cognizant enough to keep his body turned toward the jury as his answer goes toward the jury, and then he sort of tracks the other attorney with his eyes going to the other side. But the most fascinating thing is to see these things raise up in him and him trying to control him as he gets really still, and that first hand comes out. And we know these are illustrators. That's how your brain emphasizes specific words or phrases, like I did just then, specific words or phrases. And so we see those go away, and then the other one comes back up and he starts trying there. As he tries to control this, we're seeing those things butt together. And that's the odd behavior. That's what gives you the weird feeling that you get when you watch him. You go, something's not right here.
Can I ask
So he's painting by the numbers.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and did you notice how small he was? Did you notice him getting smaller? Shrinking? We call that turtling for a reason. He's turning into a smaller target, trying to dry up and disappear.
And this is an unconscious thing when people are under attack.
And eventually, at one point on the stand, he exposes the top of his head. That's submission all day, every day.
What's interesting to note is that Maggie was nowhere near the Moselle property on the day of the murders. Alex had to lure her home. She wasn't anywhere around. She was at the beach. He needed her home for a reason. Take a look.
On June 7, 2021, Maggie Murdaugh wasn't living in the Moselle property. She was living here at the Edisto Beach House.
Maggie called me that day and said she was at Edisto. She had some men working on the house, just maintenance work, getting it ready for the summer.
Did you have contact with Miss Maggie Murdaugh sometime prior to getting to Moselle that morning?
Yes, sir. She texted me. In the text, Maggie said, Alec wants me to come home.
So Maggie gets in her car. She leaves the beach house for the very last time. She asks the workers to lock up behind themselves, and she heads to Moselle.
She said, Alec wants me to come home. And she kind of sounded like she didn't want to come home because she really liked being at Edisto. And then she said, well, Alec asked Paul to come home too because he's got to fix the mess up out there because they were planning on having a hunt that weekend, so he wanted everything ready and good to go.
And Moselle is not close by. It's roughly 65 miles away, or an hour and 20 minutes, according to GPS.
What do you think about that?
I thought this is very powerful testimony because you realize that this place where this happened, Moselle, it's isolated. It's this big hunting lodge, and Maggie wasn't living there, and Paul wasn't living there. So how could, if it was some random killer, how would they know that on this evening, Maggie would have come an hour and a half from away, Paul would have come from all of the stuff he's doing socially and school, and happened to be there at the time that this killing happened? And remember, Alex said something very interesting. He said when he was there, just before that kennel video was taken, and the dogs were running wild, he goes, there was no one else there. The dogs were not alerting to any other strangers on the property. So how could this person just suddenly show up right when those few moments that Alex leaves and goes to the house and kill both of these people who weren't even supposed to be there on the property? But Dr. Phil, I also want to say something interesting. Those two women that spoke up and gave that testimony, Marian and Blanca, they were very clear in what they heard and what they knew. When Alex took the stand, he essentially called them both liars, said they were both wrong, they were mistaken. So who do you want to believe? The two women who have nothing to gain by telling the truth here. This is a very scary, difficult thing for them to do. Or Alec, who is the master liar, and he's turning around and calling them liars because he knows how powerful that testimony is.
Coming up, when Alex was questioned about finding the bodies of his wife and son, his behavior was very telling. We'll show you why when we come back.
He's talking along, and all of a sudden he goes, when? When? And he looks right at the prosecutor. What was going on there?
Watch the prosecutor's body language. He's browbeating him, so there's some baggage between the two of them, clearly.
Closed captioning provided by Alex Murdaugh was just found guilty of the murders of his wife, Maggie, and his youngest son, Paul. The downfall of this Southern dynasty captivated the country as they watched Alex take the stand in his own defense. Now, Scott and Greg say Alex's body language gave away his lies when he was questioned about finding the bodies. Take a look.
You got out of the car, according to what you told law enforcement, repeatedly, and went and checked the bodies, correct? Before you called 911, is that correct?
No, sir, that's not correct.
You're saying you didn't say that to law enforcement?
I don't know what I said to law enforcement, Mr. Waters, but I can tell you this. When I pulled up and I saw Mags and Paw, I jumped out of that car. I know that I went back to my car and I called 911 as quickly as I could. That point in time, when I got on the phone, then is when I went to them and did the things that I did. So, what you're saying is not accurate.
You're saying that you didn't say very specifically to law enforcement that you went to them prior to calling 911?
When?
After you got out of the car, you told law enforcement repeatedly that you went over and checked the bodies before you called 911.
No, I don't. If I did say that, I don't believe that's accurate. Did I check Maggie and Paul before I called 911?
Correct.
No, sir. That's not accurate.
At least that's not what I remember.
That's not what you remember saying, or that's not what you say now happened?
No, that's not what I believe happened.
What jumps out at you most about that?
I think, once again, we're seeing, if I played the second half of that for you and didn't tell you anything about what happened before that, and I said, what happened 15 seconds before that? You'd probably say nothing. Everything seems to be going very smoothly. He goes from this uncontrollable, trying to control his emotions and crying, to this thing where he's talking like we're talking now. Everything looks normal. That there almost is no transition between the sadness and then going back to what he's talking about. That is strange.
Let's make a list of stress indicators, because there are no indicators of deception, only stress that pile up, and we look for them. Mouth grooming. It means the mucous membranes in your mouth are drying out. When you're crying, that is not happening.
It's the most animated with his face and head we've seen so far.
He does that. He does what we call, in polygraphy, they talk about descending staircase breathing. Once you get to a point where you've been trying to control your breathing, you go, whoosh. He does that. His blink rate goes through the roof. As your eyes dry out from stress, your eyelids move more. So we see all those three things. He's adapting with the mic. And finally, he does something I call the chained elephant, as he rocks back and forth from one foot to the other, in this case, in a chair. All those are clusters. They all add together.
And I thought it was very interesting when he's on the stand. He doesn't just say, this is what happened. He goes, I believe, or I would have done this, or the data says. I mean, it's like he can't even speak for himself. He's trying to keep everything straight, and he just buffers everything. I thought it was interesting. At one point in that last clip, he's talking along, and all of a sudden he goes, when? When?
When?
And he looks right at the prosecutor. What was going on there? Because it looked like all of a sudden his animosity came out towards, he's just drilling right at that prosecutor.
Watch the prosecutor's body language. He's browbeating him, so there's some baggage between the two of them, clearly.
Yeah, Vinny, you were in the courtroom. What was his trial team doing while he was self-destructing like this on the witness stand?
Well, first, remember, it's always the defendant's decision whether or not to testify. My guess is from the beginning, they did not want this man to get up on the witness stand because they knew what could happen and what did, in fact, happen. They're picking moments here and there where they can jump in, but the way he was being questioned by prosecutors didn't give the defense any room to jump up and object about anything, because Creighton Waters picked a specific strategy for the cross-examination. It wasn't the Perry Mason, isn't it true, isn't it true, isn't it true? It wasn't that. It wasn't yes, no answers. He purposely asked him open-ended questions because he knew the more Alex Murdaugh spoke, the less credible he would be. And that is all playing out right now, as we can hear from the body language experts and the juror. Let the guy talk. This entire case was built upon the words of Alex Murdaugh. He paved his own road to the penitentiary.
Is that true? The more he talked, the worse it got?
It is.
He just dug himself a hole?
He sure did.
Now, Alex tried to manipulate the testimony of his own housekeeper. We'll talk about that next. Closed captioning provided by...
It's similar to your conversation with Blanca that she testified about when you talked to her about the clothes that you were supposedly wearing. What made her feel uncomfortable? Do you remember that testimony, sir?
What's similar to that?
Well, that you're talking to both of these individuals about their testimony in a manner that's inconsistent with what they know.
No, I don't think your assertion is accurate. You have to understand this. On August the 11th, when I went to meet with David Owens, and in that, David Owens asked me about, he showed me that Snapchat and asked me about the clothes that I had on. And shortly after that, the next time I was with Blanca, I asked Blanca about those clothes because David Owens had asked me about them and made an issue about it. And so I checked with Blanca to see what I specifically asked Blanca, and it was an issue to me. So I got Blanca and I said, I need you to sit down and talk with me about this. This is important. That was the conversation and why I was asking Blanca.
All right, Again, you're very specific about your memories of that conversation. Is that correct, Mr. Murdaugh?
You dang right I'm consistent about that, because a very short time before that, David Owens is asking me questions and telling me I'm a suspect in the murder of my wife and my child and asking me about my clothes. You dang right it was important.
It was important, right.
And you dang right I remember why I went to her and for what reason.
If Robin and I went out to lunch and I came back, you said, well, how was lunch? And I said, well, Robin and I had a great time, and Robin got chicken and I got the salad, and I said her name 8 times in 30 seconds. You would say, hang on just a minute, and you'd be trying to find her on the phone because you know something was wrong because my eyebrows were like this and my forehead was wrinkled like that. Not the grief muscle, but a muscle of concern. You'd be worried. Hang on just a second. As I was talking, you'd be, where are you? You know, that's what would be happening. When somebody gets in there and they start mentioning the same name over or the same piece of information over and over and over, they're thinking. They're up here in their head thinking. It's that trying to make time to create the rest of the story, as he's probably making a lot of that up as he's dodging around the things he knows is wrong with his story from before.
So 2 simple ones. Loss of verbal fluency, good indicator a person's being deceptive. They're scrambling around in their brain thinking the right words. But he's emphatic that you're dang right, I have my details, but he can't spit them out.
This disruption of fluency in his verbal, he's clearly making this up as he goes along, right?
There's a squirrel in the road, and he's saying, what do I do now? What do I do now?
He's going to be subject to a lot of litigation going forward. Buster may be subject to litigation going. This is a huge beginning, a double murder trial with consecutive life sentences, but there's a lot left to play out in this, right?
There is, and actually the judge brought that up at the time of sentencing after he, was handling the sentencing on this case. He also reminded everyone, look, you, Mr. Murdaugh, are still facing 99 other charges, which I am going to oversee, and we're going to get to that right away. He said there are victims who need their cases to be heard. And then you mentioned Buster. So that goes back to the 2015 death of Stephen Smith. That case was closed out as a hit and run. During that investigation, Buster Murdaugh's name and the Murdaugh family name came up. You hear reports of up to 20 plus times in the investigation, and the case was just closed. Once the double murders happened, Paul and Maggie were killed, the investigation starts in that. Very soon after that, SLED came out and announced, we're reopening that Stephen Smith case because what we found in this investigation leads us to believe that that wasn't done right. We're going to redo that investigation.
Speaking of Buster, I'd like to ask Craig if his testimony had any impact on the jurors. We'll be right back. We've been analyzing the body language, the lying stress indicators from Alex Murdaugh, who took the stand in his double murder trial. He was found guilty, sentenced to life in prison, 2 consecutive versus concurrent. So he's got to spend life in prison, and then he's got to spend life in prison again. So clearly he damaged himself on the stand. Now, his other son, Buster, also took the stand. Did that have any impact on you or jurors that you know of?
Buster's?
Yeah.
No, sir, it didn't. Not to me.
Did you expect him to support his father?
I did, of course.
Did he seem sincere?
I think he seemed sincere, but...
Do you think he believed his father?
I'm not sure.
Hard to say?
It is.
Yeah. But you did expect him to support him?
I did.
Did it have any impact at all on your decision?
No.
None. Did anybody other than Alex have anything that anybody said, pro or con, have any influence other than Alex? And I know evidence did. You said the Snapchat video, the timeline. But did any other testimony have any influence on you?
Well, with the rolled up jacket, I mean, that kind of stuck in my mind.
Yeah. That didn't sit well?
No, it didn't.
Yeah. Okay. Was the closing argument effective?
Yes.
From the prosecution?
From the prosecution, yes.
Did it go too long?
Maybe.
Yeah.
The trial went too long.
Yeah. Benny, did you see any impact on Buster's testimony at all?
The thing with Buster, I mean, he was there every day, and I'm sitting in the courtroom, either in the same row or one row behind him all the time I was down there. And the whole family, it was difficult to read them. They weren't overly emotional. And it's a little bit surprising because of the nature of these allegations, et cetera. But even Alex's brother, John Marvin, would introduce himself to everyone, whether it was someone like me or one of the investigators, a sheriff's deputy. So the entire emotion of this family was a tough read for us, and much different than, I would say, 90% of the trials that I've covered. A lot less emotion than I've seen in other circumstances where, not exactly like this, but you have maybe a husband and a wife and one's accused of murdering the other. There's usually many more tears in the gallery and on the witness stand.
Yeah, it really was different. I observed the same thing, and Buster was kind of like a mannequin sitting out there. So coming up, how will a personality type like Alex fare in prison? We'll talk about that next. Closed captioning provided by We've been analyzing the body language, the lying, stress indicators from Alex Murdaugh, who took the stand in his double murder trial. He was found guilty, sentenced to life in prison, 2 consecutive versus concurrent. So he's got to spend life in prison, and then he's got to spend life in prison again. So clearly he damaged himself on the stand. Now, his other son, Buster, also took the stand. Did that have any impact on you or jurors that you know of?
Buster's?
Yeah.
No, sir, it didn't. Not to me.
Did you expect him to support his father?
I did, of course.
Did he seem sincere?
I think he seemed sincere, but...
Do you think he believed his father?
I'm not sure.
Hard to say.
It is.
Yeah. But you did expect him to support him.
I did.
Did it have any impact at all on your decision?
No.
None. Did anybody other than Alex have anything that anybody said, pro or con, have any influence other than Alex? And I know evidence did. You said the Snapchat video, the timeline. But did any other testimony have any influence on you?
Well, with the rolled up jacket, I mean, that kind of stuck in my mind.
Yeah. That didn't sit well?
No, it didn't.
Yeah. Okay. Was the closing argument effective?
Yes.
From the prosecution?
From the prosecution, yes.
Did it go too long?
Maybe.
Yeah.
The trial went too long.
Yeah. Benny, did you see any impact on Buster's testimony at all?
The thing with Buster, I mean, he was there every day, and I'm sitting in the courtroom, either in the same row or one row behind him all the time I was down there. And the whole family, it was difficult to read them. They weren't overly emotional. And it's a little bit surprising because of the nature of these allegations, et cetera. But even Alex's brother, John Marvin, would introduce himself to everyone, whether it was someone like me or one of the investigators, a sheriff's deputy. So the entire emotion of this family was a tough read for us, and much different than, I would say, 90% of the trials that I've covered. A lot less emotion than I've seen in other circumstances where, not exactly like this, but you have maybe a husband and a wife and one's accused of murdering the other. There's usually many more tears in the gallery and on the witness stand.
Yeah, it really was different. I observed the same thing, and Buster was kind of like a mannequin sitting. Also listen to Robin's podcast, I've Got a Secret with Robin McGraw. You can check them both out on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.